Gaza right now, it's almost as if Ukraine is in the background, but I wanted to give a little update on that, which is, it looks like by the end of the week, Biden, as if he doesn't have enough to do right now, is going to introduce a package of money for weapons for Ukraine, Israel. I'll just start over on that. It looks like Biden is going to introduce by the end of the week a very huge package for weapons to both Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. They're talking about it being $100 billion, with 10 billion of that being for Israel, most of it being for Ukraine, but also money for Taiwan. So, let's support the genocidal government of Israel. Let's keep that Ukraine war going, and let's provoke China. This administration and Congress is just crazy. So we will have a lot to do when that package is introduced to try to stop it. Also in Ukraine, there was a lot of discussion about whether Biden was going to allow for these long-range missiles called ATACMS, and it turns out, we found out today, that he has already done that quietly so as to take the Russians by surprise, but he's also already transferred these in mid-September without us knowing about it, and they carry cluster munitions. So that's the horrible update from Ukraine. In terms of Gaza, well, we're going to have a lot of wonderful speakers speaking tonight. I just wanted to say that our longtime wonderful code pinker from California, Leslie Angeline, I'm not sure if she made it onto the call, but she began a hunger strike today, open-ended, to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, for humanitarian aid for Gaza, and of course, an end to the siege. And we launched it today by going to many, many congressional offices, and thanks to the others of you who joined us today. We went to the offices of the 13 Congress people, and I think Hassan will talk about this, who actually are calling for a ceasefire. There's only 13 of them that I know, but we went to every office, and they were very glad to have us there. And in some of the offices, they said that they were getting lots of calls thanking them. Like in Andre Carson, they said 80% of the calls were thanking him for signing on to that resolution calling for a ceasefire. So we have to let other Congress people know that they actually get praise if they do this. And we participated with the wonderful demonstration that If Not Now, which is mostly young Jewish people, organized in front of the White House yesterday, in which about 50 people got arrested. We're excited about the protest tomorrow that Jewish Voice for Peace is doing, and hopefully Esty will tell us more about that. But being here in DC, it is the center of that protest that will meet tomorrow at Congress. And we expect that to be a very profound one. And then there's also a call by If Not Now to gather in Washington, D.C. on Friday as well. So it looks like every day of the week here in Washington, and Noor will tell us, I know, about protests that are happening all over the country and the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Medea, for that comprehensive news update. And I'll just add that I read on antiwar.com a few minutes ago that Jim Jordan, who's now the lead candidate for the Speaker of the House, has agreed to link aid packages between Israel and Ukraine. I don't know about Taiwan, but I think it behooves us not to just focus on one political party, Democrats, but Republicans as well in Congress, since the fight to remove Speaker McCarthy was largely over this continuous Ukraine aid package and the idea that you combine different subjects. The fight was for single subject legislation. So let's,
and Marcy, Jim Jordan at one point said that he was against more aid to Ukraine, and that if he were speaker, he would not bring it to the floor. So it seems like he's quickly changed his mind on that.
That's politics, right? All right. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Noor, our Palestine campaigner, who is very involved, obviously, right now in calling for a ceasefire and helping us educate others about the roots of the violence. So from Chicago, I would be honored to welcome Noor to CODEPINK Congress.
Thank you, Marcy. Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's really great to see all these people. I mean, we have 300 people on already, especially with the very dangerous misinformation that's been spreading. It's kind of warms my heart a little bit to see like all these people so willing to educate themselves and willing to just hear people out and, not just go and be pawns for our oppressor. But like Marcy said, my name is Noor, and I've been the Palestine campaigner here at CODEPINK since about the beginning of the year. And since a lot of you may not know me, I've been an organizer for Palestine for about 5 years now. I'm also Palestinian myself. Both my parents were born in a small village in the West Bank. So obviously this is something that's very important to me and very close to me. So yes, thank you again, everybody, for making it here. Let's talk a little bit about the current moment we're in. Gaza has been under siege for over a week now. And this morning we got the horrific news that Israel bombed a hospital, Al-Ahli Al-Arabi Hospital, today. Obviously, Gazans are not in a very good position right now with water, food running out, water being cut off, electricity being cut off. It's obviously very detrimental for Gazans to be losing yet another resource. And from that airstrike, at least 1,200 Gazans were murdered by the Israeli airstrike. And what we're witnessing right before our eyes here is a brutal war crime. This is not normal behavior. It's not normal to collectively punish an entire group of people on a very small area of land that's densely packed, and to target, a hospital, which we consider like to be one of these like humanitarian buildings where people can go to receive treatment, to seek refuge. And just among all of this violence and pain and genocide that we're witnessing right before our eyes, I know a lot of people here are from like all parts of the world, but many of us are from the United States. And we got the news that our president, Biden, left for Israel today. And he's been consistently expressing staunch support for the apartheid state of Israel and kind of egging on this very brutal and violent oppressor to continue to collectively punish this group of people who have no crime except being Palestinian and being born in Gaza, being born in an open air prison with nowhere to go. But I know this has been a very heavy time, and it's very disheartening for us to see the powers that be against Palestinians, against an oppressed group of people. But I think it's important for us to highlight and seek like optimism in the fact that people around the world largely do support Palestine. Like they see oppression, and we know this because there's been protests across the globe, right? Like with very high turnout. I'm based here in Chicago, and we've had at least 3 over the past week and a half. And I think at our last one, there was about 15,000 people there. So although those in power have, and, it's worth noting that they do have a lot of the control, but although they are against those who are oppressed, and although they are so interested in continuing this oppression, we know and we can seek comfort in the fact that this is not it's not representative of the world. It's not that we live in an evil world, but So I think it's important for us to just remain hopeful. We don't want to see the pain of Palestinians and feel so discouraged that there's nothing that we can do, because it's not true that this evil is the norm, right? It's not true that this is what most people believe. So although people in power may not support Palestine, we could be optimistic. We know people do. And we know that people are powerful. This is how people have achieved liberation time and time again in the past, the power of the people, right? So I just want to kind of start by like uplifting everybody a little bit and just show like a video and some photos of protests across the world, just so we feel like a little bit more optimistic going into this and we don't go into it feeling so hopeless. So if we could play the video now, please.
So this is a compilation of protests, yeah?
Yes. So that was just like a few across the globe. And as you can see, these aren't just, small protests. Like this is thousands of people willing to speak out and say, we're witnessing a genocide right in front of us. And we're not going to just let that happen. We're not just gonna sit and let this happen without saying something, without showing that the world doesn't stand for this. And then we also just have a few more photos of other protests that were going on, mostly in the US, New York, Chicago, like I said, Tokyo, Geneva, France, let's see, South Africa, of course, Italy, and Canada, but there's so many others. This isn't everywhere there's been a protest. I saw one that happened in Seoul, Korea yesterday. So it's very clear that the people of the world stand with Palestine, and I think that's really important for us to highlight. But that's all I have to share.
Okay. Great. Thank you. It is very uplifting to see the photos of the mass protests all over the world and in the United States, where we've seen thousands of people pour into the street. New York City, as you mentioned, Los Angeles, a demonstration in front of the Israeli consulate, Cleveland, Dearborn, Michigan, Washington, D.C., and on and on. So thank you so much, Noor. Now we're going to turn to Esty Chandler, who's going to give a brief update on Jewish Voice for Peace and their collaboration with If Not Now, another Jewish-oriented organization. Esty Chandler is the National Board Chair for Jewish Voice for Peace Action. That's the political arm of Jewish Voice for Peace. She's the organizer in Greater Los Angeles for Jewish Voice for Peace. Welcome, Esty.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys for doing this show and inviting such awesome guests. I can't wait to hear from them. I can update us on a few things. The reason why, one really important reason why we have teamed up with If Not Now in this moment is that we said in our political director on Monday morning found herself of last week when she was talking to people on the Hill, realizing that there's only one other Jewish organization that's actually doing the right thing here and calling for de-escalation, calling for ceasefire, calling for no more violence, and that's If Not Now. So we quickly got together and realized that our strength, we have greater strength together, and all over the country where there are JVP chapters and If Not Now chapters, people have been coming together. Here last Friday in Los Angeles, we in a very quick planning period of time, few hours, got about 150 people out in front of Brad Sherman's office, who I like to call Bad Sherman because it describes his policy, and to show the world that Jews are not a monolith, and there are definitely many Jews that are out there calling for de-escalation, calling for ceasefire, and understanding that what we are watching is a genocide on Palestinians, and that we have to do everything we can, everything in our power, all day, every day, to stop that. I'll say that another thing that we're seeing in the local context, so people can look out for it in their communities, are abhorrent racist letters going out from school boards in different districts, resolutions that are happening that are completely one-sided. Today in Los Angeles at the county supervisors meeting, there was a resolution in support of Israel that literally did not have the word Palestine or Palestinian in it. And in spite of the fact that there was about an hour and a half of public comment, and 95% of it was in saying, do not pass this, I'm opposed to this, and saying all the problems with it, they ended up passing it unanimously. So please look out in your communities for resolutions like that, where you can go and make public comment and organize and get people there so that they can see that these are their voters in front of them and they are not representing us. And so why would we ever vote for them again? Also look out for these letters that are going out. And if you can team up in your community, and get a few organizations together, peace organizations, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, to say why these are so dangerous and harmful to our school children to be putting these out, it would be really, really helpful.
Thank you so much, SD Chandler with Jewish Voice for Peace. And I second that. It behooves us all to check the agendas for city council meetings, county board of supervisors, school board meetings, and to even be proactive and send a ceasefire resolution to them. I was appalled to see in my own community in Santa Barbara, California, Chumash Land, a city council person posting on her Facebook page just the words Israel in huge letters. And of course, I pushed back as diplomatically as I could, and then went to my own Facebook page and wrote Free Palestine. So thank you, Esty, for informing us about that. Now we're going to go to our first guest. It's my great honor to introduce Hassan El-Tayeb. He is the legislative director for Middle East policy at the Friends Committee on National Legislation. Hassan leads FCNL's work calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the bloodshed, the genocide in the Middle East. In addition to advocating for Palestinian human rights, Hassan works to end U.S. military complicity in the Saudi-led war on Yemen and advance diplomacy with Iran. Prior to joining FCNL, Hassan served as the co-director of the national advocacy group Just Foreign Policy, where he worked to reassert congressional war authority and promote human rights in the Middle East and Latin America. His passion for foreign affairs is rooted in his desire to make life safer for people in the Middle East, including his extended family in Jordan, in Palestine, in Yemen. Welcome, Hassan, to CODEPINK Congress.
Marcy, thank you so much. Much love to CODEPINK. I lobbied Rep. Jayapal's office with Medea and friends today. So how much time do I have here?
About 8 minutes.
About 8 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna get through this and we're gonna be action focused, action oriented. But I did want to give folks an update about what's happening in North and South Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of people have been heeding the evacuation orders by Israel issued on Friday morning. The order is ineffective because there's nowhere for people to go. Israeli airstrikes are raining down on people trying to even do the evacuation. So a lot of people have chosen to just stay in their homes. And displacement, according to the UN, may have reached 1 million. So this is absolutely a horrific situation. Humanitarian crisis is growing more and more desperate. And it's critical that Israel turns the water back on and restores electricity and restores fuel so the water pumps can actually work. And that's something that I want to make sure people understand. On October 15, you saw the Israeli minister, post that, that Israel would turn the water back on in the south. This confused a lot of people, my read is that, they're trying to deflect international pressure. But like I said, you need fuel and electricity to pump water, through infrastructure that's already badly damaged. And so absolutely critical that we get the water turned back on urgently. So I was also just completely horrified and shocked by the bombing of the hospital that Noor mentioned in Gaza, leaving at least 500 dead, thousands more injured and unaccounted for. And that's, as at least 500. I've heard reports that it could be over 1,000 people that died in this just horrific bombing, which emphasizes and reinforces the need for an immediate ceasefire, de-escalation, restraint, protection of civilians. Human Rights Watch has reported that white phosphorus is being used by the Israeli government, and that's a chemical weapon. This should never be used against civilians. So, okay, I could go on and on and on, but we need to get serious about creating a intersectional movement across the country, across the world. That's already starting to happen. I want to name a couple vehicles. I lobby Capitol Hill, unfortunately, every single day. And I want to give folks an update about where I see our work really making a difference in this important moment. The Tlaib-Bush resolution to call for a ceasefire, it's a very simple document. This is a very powerful vehicle that we should all support and try to get our members of Congress on. It's already got 13 co-sponsors. And that's fantastic. We were able to get a few new ones on board. Rep. Velasquez got on there, so that was great to see her. And we are expanding the number of people on the Hill calling for a ceasefire, but that is not enough. I'll also flag that there was another vehicle by Reps. Pocan, Schakowsky, McGovern, and Jayapal calling for humanitarian aid to Gaza. Now, I bring that up. We love that letter. We need aid to Gaza. We got to turn the taps back on. We got to get humanitarian aid in, but clearly not enough. We do need de-escalation and a ceasefire. But I would just point to that letter as potential low-hanging fruit for us to get on the Tlaib and Bush resolution. So take a look at that list. If one of those folks are your member of Congress, let's get them on that statement. I think folks are very close, especially with this hospital bombing. People are realizing like, whoa, this is way too much. This isn't what we said. I do think that there was this initial burst of outrage against the attacks in southern Israel, but cooler heads are starting to prevail and realizing that, okay, the civilian casualties are bad enough. But this, if there is a ground invasion, this could turn into, I'm not even trying to be alarmist here, World War III. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Jordan, Iran. I could go on. This is just absolutely a precipice. And that's exactly why the president has gone to Israel. One thing I will say, him being there delays the ground invasion. That gives us time to build our movement, to make our voices heard, to make our calls for ceasefire known. And we have to use every single moment we have. And I've been on a couple of these calls. This is by far the most urgent call I've ever been on with Code Pink. And I am telling you, we have a window of opportunity. And I'll also say is that the mood is shifting on Capitol Hill. I'm talking to these offices. People are realizing like, whoa, Israel, the Israeli security intelligence, they have blundered. This is the biggest national security blunder in Israel's history. They basically, are completely, they have egg on their face and they feel humiliated and are trying to make up for it and commit revenge and are taking it out on the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza. And the US lawmakers are starting to see, hey, we've been here before with 9/11. We went into Afghanistan. We went into Iraq, complete disaster. And so I do think you're starting to see people trying to rein in the Israelis from going into the full ground invasion. So we have time. Okay, just a couple other things I'll say, and I'll pass it back because I know we've got some other great speakers. We have been trying to get people on the record for the ceasefire. Now, yes, get them on the statement, the resolution with Bush and Tlaib. If they don't want to sign that, great. Make their own statement. Put out their own tweet. You know, there's other ways that they can get on board with this. We just need to keep the momentum going. As far as senators on our side, I just saw that. Not many. I'm sorry to break it to you, but we got Senator Bernie Sanders calling for no more bombs, no more missiles. You know what? I'll take it. We've also got Senator Markey saying de-escalation. He got booed at a pro-Israel rally. Let's back him up. Let's say, hey, Senator Markey, we love you. Let's keep going. So I think that's absolutely critical. What I'm doing, so you know, is I'm organizing as much as I can all these groups in Washington, D.C. It's not a fun job, but someone's got to do it. We just sent a 70+ org letter to every office on Capitol Hill. I got to say, I got a couple colorful responses to that letter. It's all good. We can handle it. But that's what we need. And our asks are very clear. Publicly call for a ceasefire. This is a public statement campaign right now. 2, protect all civilian lives. You might want a ceasefire to protect Palestinians in Gaza. That's what I want. You might want a ceasefire to bring the Israeli hostages home. That's fine. You may want a ceasefire to prevent an escalation with Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, etc. That's fine too. So it's all good. Let's protect civilians. Last but not least, we need to urge people to respect international humanitarian law. Those were the 3 asks. I'm going to share a couple documents here for everyone to have. And one is we are trying to keep track of all the statements. I'm going to put that in the doc here. And there might be some other trackers, but see that there, that could be useful. I'm going to also send the org letter that we shared with every office. Feel free to use that if you'd like. And I am so grateful to CODEPINK, to Marcy, Medea, Noor, and Esty Chandler for having me on here. And solidarity, everybody. Stay healthy, stay well. This is really intense time. But you know, if we stick together, I think we can get through this.
Thank you so much, Hassan, Legislative Director for Middle East Policy for the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And I echo your sentiments. You know, I've had a really hard time sleeping at all the last few nights, but I have to remind myself that if I want to be effective, I need to get some sleep. You know, it's not going to help the cause. So I'm going to try to focus on that myself. And thank you so much for sharing those resources, Hassan, and for reminding us all to pressure our Congress members to publicly support a ceasefire and take that letter, take the resolution to our local governmental bodies as well. Okay, we have 2 more terrific guests coming up, Noura Khouri and Huada Araj. So Noura will be introduced next. Noura, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce Noura.
Yes, it's my honor to be introducing my cousin, Noura Khouri. She's a Palestinian living in Oakland, a homeland, and has worked for the past 2 decades as a human rights activist, campaign strategist, and community organizer. Noura lived and worked in occupied Palestine with the International Solidarity Movement and other human rights organizations, including Badr Refugee and Residency Center, Al-Haq, and Holy Land Trust. She works as a preschool teacher and serves as an Al-Awda Palestine Right to Return Coalition National Committee member, Green Party International Delegate, and part of beloved community circles, where she conspires to destroy walls and build bridges of solidarity. So without further ado, welcome Noura to CODEPINK Congress.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Noura and CODEPINK, for always showing up and standing strong and tall and unapologetically unafraid to speak truth to power and take action when it feels like nobody else will or is able to. And so it really means a lot to be here with you all and to stand together. Really, this is the only time that I feel lack of despair and overwhelm. It's really just been too much. Like the news is nonstop with one atrocity after another coming in. And yeah, sleep, as much as we like to, does evade us in these times. So I just, have a little bit of a, I've just really been struggling as I've watched and listened and heard from all of the leaders, so-called leaders, and those that in this 21st century globally who have been responsible and created all the mechanisms designed to prevent us from the worst of humanity, spiraling into savagery against civilians, have failed us, and they've failed miserably and managed to crumble into pieces before our eyes. So as Palestinians, these are some of the hardest and darkest, most brutal times we've witnessed in almost 8 decades of dark, brutal, and painful times since 1948. And prior to this onslaught in Gaza, we've been watching and witnessing helplessly in horror as Israel rapidly escalates and implements its final stages of their master plan for Jerusalem, which means consolidating, connecting the Jewish-only transportation system to the settlements from Jerusalem to the West Bank to effectively take over, as they call it, Judea and Samaria. Meanwhile, Jewish settlers born in Brooklyn, Poland, and Russia, and everywhere else in the world are protected by occupation forces. And they descend onto Palestinian villages, destroying homes, looting and burning entire villages in mass pogroms. It's so surreal and feels like a nightmare horror movie taking place in slow motion. In doing so, they further isolate Palestinians from each other and make life so unbearable that those who survive the onslaught will be so miserable they're forced to leave and not look back, just as my parents did in 1967. Following which, my mother and her family fled Jerusalem and my father's family from Birzeit, and that meant they had to give up their citizenship and right to return. So I was born here, making it almost impossible for me to go back and return and live with my people. But to return and to stand with my people is the only thing I want to do in these times, rather than sitting here scrolling helplessly, witnessing as my people are pummeled and genocided. And just as in 2003, when these atrocities were taking place, it became abundantly clear that the governments of the world, the EU, the international community have failed the Palestinian people. And return is exactly what I did from my first time ever in 2003 to witness, document, and do direct action as an international standing with Palestinians. And it was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had. And return again is exactly what I was planning to do. I haven't been there in 17 years, but I was planning to be there this Friday. I have a ticket still, but unfortunately, obviously, not able to at this time. But I was planning to co-lead an Olive Harvest delegation with a group of mostly young Palestinians, many Palestinian Americans that have not, many of which who have not ever been back because it is so difficult for us to return. So we are now reassessing the situation and waiting sort of for the smoke to clear, but we are planning to return, and we invite and are calling on internationals to come to Palestine again. So if that is something that you would at all be able or willing to consider, please message me with your email, and we can just discuss, as things become clear, what is possible and if it makes sense. Because I truly believe the hope does not lie in a political solution provided by the government. Although I know this is something that we have to do anyways, and we must go through the motions. It is not to undermine any of the important work of lobbying. It just needs to all be done at the same time. But the conscious of the morality of the people like you all here is truly what gives me hope. And it is by standing together and speaking out that we will prevail. And I do know, and I understand there is an intense bullying and silencing campaign going on right now. It's so intense. People are losing their jobs and rights for simply posting on social media. And so there is a very real fear, but we can't allow that to determine our actions and our words. And allow them to win, literally allowing fascism to rise up. It is what's gotten us to where we have been in the past 2 decades is the same fear. And, I just want to really implore us to not be afraid to stand up for the resistance and to support the brave, Palestinians that are fighting back against their own genocide. It needs to be understood that that is the only barrier between the complete extermination of the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank at this time. And so if you're in a place where you're able to understand and explain that, I think it's really, really critical as Palestinians, standing with Palestinians to be able to articulate that. Yeah, we could just definitely take strength also in the inspiration from the young Jews, if not now, that locked down in front of the White House yesterday and in San Francisco in front of Pelosi's office this week to demand an end to the support and arming of the genocide. I think we need absolutely more actions like that. If Israel's allowed to get away with the sheer lack of accountability and naked violence it is now, in broad daylight with the whole world watching, what does that mean and say for the future of humanity and the hope for oppressed peoples from here on Turtle Island to everywhere with US military bases, and allowing the warmongers literally pushing for World War III, as we heard earlier, as they go on threatening Iran, China, Russia, and anyone else that stands in their way. So the time for action is upon us. Let us stand together, shoulder to shoulder, as we march forward, unwavering in our support, unwavering in our commitment to justice and truth. Together, we can unleash a transformation where the Palestinian people rise and become victorious over colonialism, reclaiming their freedom and their right to return, as well as their right to live in dignity in a liberated Palestine, free from imperialism, colonialism, racism, and Zionism. Let our voices resound with unwavering conviction, shaking the foundations of US government complicity in these war crimes, including the $4 billion in annual military aid to the Zionist colonizers. Let us rally the international communities and ourselves, igniting an unquenchable fire of solidarity. For it is only through unity that we can find strength and collective action that we shall dismantle these walls of oppression. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noura Khoury, coming to us from the Bay Area in California, national board member of the Al-Ada Right to Return Coalition. Great to have you with us on CODEPINK Congress. And I want to remind everybody to please stay with us throughout this program, because after we hear from our next guest and have a Q&A, we're going to start our Capitol calling party, where we will be calling our representatives in the House, in the Senate, and saying, where is your call, your public call for a ceasefire, for humanitarian corridors to stop this genocide in Gaza? Vote no on more weapons to enforce this genocide, to enforce this horrific occupation of Palestine. So do stay with us until the end. And now I will turn this over to Medea to introduce our next guest.
Well, yes, thank you so much, Marcy. And I'm very excited to introduce our next guest, someone I've known for a long, long time, Huwaida Araf. She is a Palestinian American activist and civil rights attorney who co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, known by its acronym ISM, a Palestinian-led organization that using nonviolent protests and international pressure to support Palestinians. She was formerly a candidate for the US Congress representing Michigan's 10th Congressional District. She specializes in international human rights and humanitarian law, as well as domestic US and civil rights. A Hebrew-speaking Palestinian Christian, Huwaida spent time living on an Israeli kibbutz before rejecting coexistence efforts in favor of advocating for Palestinian resistance. She is the daughter of 2 Palestinian Christian parents. Her mother came from Beit Zahur in the West Bank, and her father was a Palestinian citizen of Israel. She was born in Detroit shortly after her parents immigrated to the United States, where she majored in Arabic studies, Judaic studies, and political science at the University of Michigan. So thank you so much for joining us, Ueda.
Thank you so much for that very, very generous introduction, Medea. Thank you, CODEPINK, and everyone for being here tonight. I think we are all just horrified at what we're witnessing and the fact that we are witnessing it and that we have to plead with our representatives, with our politicians to stop a genocide. And I don't use that term lightly. Even though I studied international human rights and humanitarian law, and that's what I specialized in for many, many years, it is only recently that I started saying that we need to look into Israel committing the crime of genocide. And now we are seeing it unfold, and our countries are failing in their obligation to intervene. The Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, the very first article before it even defines genocide, calls on all signatories to pledge to prevent, not just punish. And even us as lawyers, I was on a call with international lawyers the other day, and we were talking about possible prosecutions, but our first priority is trying to prevent this from happening. And that's where we all come in. I was asked to talk a little bit about international law, but I almost feel silly talking about international law because, you know, it is a construct of the West, and it has been so hijacked to serve the interests of the West. And specifically, I think there has been no other context where it's more clear that international law only serves the interests of the powerful nations, as it is in the case of Palestine, where international law has been hijacked really so the Western countries can back Israel in the way that it does and shield Israel from its obligations to abide by international law. And yet we have it, and because I was asked to talk about it, maybe I'll touch on it a tiny bit. But before that, I want to say, and I'm sorry because I was traveling, I traveled to DC for some of the national actions here. And so I got on late and I didn't hear some of what was said before me. So I hope I'm not repeating. But one of the things that I saw quickly in the chat right before I got on is, and I don't know who made the comment, but it was a statement to the effect that what Palestinians need is like good PR and PR advice. And I would push back on that. We have a lot of Palestinians that are eloquent, they know how to describe what's happening, but their voices, our voices, are being silenced. As we see, the mainstream media has been not actually honestly reporting the news, but it has been parroting really Israeli talking points. It has been putting our politicians on that don't have a freedom and human rights and international law at the forefront of their agenda, but they have unconditionally backing Israel at the forefront of their agenda. And not only have they been not presenting the news honestly, but they have actually been putting forth fake news and continuing to repeat things that have been debunked that has come out from the Israeli military. And you probably all know about the rape and the beheaded babies and all of these things. So it's not that Palestinians need PR or training or anything like that. It's that Palestinian voices need to be listened to, and our media actually needs to be more honest about the way that it reports. And even when it does report the Palestinian side, it's almost as if in passing, everything is qualified, whereas Israel, everything is seen through the lens of our occupiers, of our colonizers, and that's how it's presented. And Palestinian deaths are always a kind of collateral damage, and the fault always goes back to the Palestinians. Whether in this context and blaming Hamas, or even before that, how Palestinians never wanted to accept peace and whatnot. And what we saw on October 7th, what kind of shocked the world, was something that Palestinians and people who have been working on this have been warning about for a very long time. The situation is absolutely unbearable. It is untenable. It cannot stay this way. We have been campaigning not only for freedom for Palestinians, but specifically the situation in Gaza, which has been completely sealed off. It is one big concentration camp. And that's another thing, this always, the headlines are what they're calling it, a war, and we're calling for a ceasefire as if there's war between kind of two equal sides or two states. Instead of presenting it as what it is, a nuclear power, the most powerful military in the world that is brutally attacking and imprisoned a large refugee camp where people have nowhere to go. That is what's happening. It is not a war on Hamas or Israel-Gaza war. It is Israel's continuation of its settler colonial project, and now what it is doing, using these genocidal policies, it can be argued is part of its settler colonial project. I got a little bit off track here. Let me go back because international law, it's, what we're talking about, what's happening today, but Israel has been violating international law for the past 8 decades. And we are constantly documenting and talking about it, from expulsion to mass transfer to the continued building of settlements, which are a war crime, torture, which is a war crime specifically prohibited by the Fourth Geneva Convention. You have collective punishment, the targeting of civilians, apartheid, major human rights organizations. Apartheid is a crime against humanity. And again, as I said, what good has it done the Palestinian people for 8 decades? International law, but when it's international law is used as a weapon of the powerful states, we see what happens and how that turns out. So Gaza specifically, the situation there has been a situation of ongoing war crimes and violations of international law. And when I said that the situation we've been warning about is going to explode, for 16 years, a criminal blockade that UN, a team of international experts in 2009 put out a report saying that this blockade is unlawful. It is punishing an entire civilian population. Another report called it persecution, which is another crime against humanity. That's back in 2009. And in 2008, 2009, Israel launched on this closed territory Operation Cast Lead, which killed over 1,300 people, destroyed thousands of buildings, homes, mosques, schools, UN places, devastation. Me and a small team of US attorneys were able to get in shortly after Operation Cast Lead, and the devastation was overwhelming. The trauma, children who were buried and locked in homes that had been targeted with the bodies of their dead parents, or those who are now living on the rubble of their homes. The children that we met then, back in 2009, have lived 15 more years of a criminal closure that has denied them any basic sense or ability to live a dignified life. And on top of that, 4 major military assaults that has killed thousands, from their friends to their neighbors to their relatives. And we expect them not to try to break out from that prison. I keep saying, I am amazed that there are not more armed fighters, that almost every single person in Gaza isn't a fighter. Because the world has shown that people of Gaza are nothing more than violence for their entire lives. Their entire lives, they've known nothing more than violence, an unlivable situation. 97% of the water is not potable. They can't even drink it, as before the water was even cut off. The UN said Gaza would be unlivable by 2020, and the world's turning a blind eye. And on top of that, allowing one of the most powerful military in the region to bomb them every few years and destroy everything else they have while the world looks away. I'm not a psychologist, but I don't see how someone that has lived that can be expected to just resist peacefully, call for your rights, or have better, PR, and then maybe the world will understand you better. Despite that, Palestinians have been, for decades, the overwhelming majority of our resistance has been nonviolent. And in 2018, when thousands and tens of thousands of Gazans marched to the barrier that Israel uses to cage them in, demanding a right to return to their homes, we saw what happened. Israel put its snipers on hilltops and shot at them like fish in a barrel, killing over 220 and injuring 36,000. A lot of them maimed, lost limbs. Was anyone held accountable? No. The International Criminal Court finally opened an investigation in 2015, and it is looking into Israel's I'm using that, but Israel's assault on Gaza in 2014. It's looking into Israel's response to the Gaza Freedom March, and it's looking into the continued building of settlements. 2015, it's been 8 years. There hasn't been any progress. It took less than a year to issue an international arrest warrant for Putin after his attack on Ukraine. So let me stop there because I could definitely go on. I'm sorry if I'm fired up, but there is so much, and I just can't believe that we have to plead for people to recognize Palestinian humanity. The last thing, and nothing I said is to justify. I'm absolutely against any killing of civilians. But if we want to really stop the violence, it is not by demonizing an entire people, blaming this all on Hamas as if there is no context to it whatsoever. We want to stop the violence. We have to address the root cause of the violence. And that's not only calling for a ceasefire now, but that is dismantling Israel's settler colonial apartheid regime so Palestinians can be free. Only freedom and justice will bring about an end to the violence.
Thank you so much. Huwaida Araf, co-founder of the International Solidarity Movement. I agree. And, people say, well, what's the solution? The solution is equal rights and dignity for all in Israel, Palestine. Personally, I don't think you can have a state, an exclusive or supremacist ethnic or religious state, treat a fifth of its population as second-class citizens, continuously expand settlements, order home demolitions, indefinite detentions, torture. I could go on, apartheid roads, apartheid walls, and think that this is safety, this is security. No, this is a recipe for endless violence until this occupation ends. All right, we were going to take a few questions. Medea or Noor, if you have a question, maybe one each, and then we'll go to our capital calling party.
Okay, Noor, you want to start?
Yeah, I could start. So I think a question that came up a lot was, does Hamas allow people to leave Gaza? And I feel like there's a lot to say about this question. So if anybody wants to answer it.
I can answer that to the best of my ability. Controlling all exits and entrance into Gaza is Israel. There is one border that is not directly controlled by Israel, but it is indirectly controlled by Israel. It is jointly controlled between Egypt and Israel. And that was specifically explained to me by Egyptian authorities while we were organizing one of the flotillas, and we were trying to get things in through Rafah, and they explained that they do not, basically Israel approves when they open and when they don't, and what goes through and what doesn't. So Hamas has kind of no control on what gets out. But now as they're talking, I think you've been hearing in the media, Hamas is encouraging Palestinians not to leave, as if, it's being presented as if Hamas just wants civilians there as human shields. That is not the case. Palestinians, you're hearing over and over Palestinians likening this to, and even saying it's worse than the original Nakba in 1948, when 750,000 Palestinians were pushed out and thinking they'd be able to come back. So Palestinians are seeing it as that if Rafah opens, and an Israeli official, I forget who it was right now, but actually said that they want the Palestinians in Gaza to go and will make tent cities for them in Sinai. Of course they want to push the people out, but the people themselves don't want to leave because they don't think that they'll be able to come home. And certainly from their experience, they won't be. So no, I don't believe it's Hamas that's, one, they have no say in, and so far the Rafah border crossing has not been opened. And Israeli officials saying that they can go and live in tent cities in the Sinai. Why don't you let them come back home, which is inside Israel with their original homes?
Yes, and I've been reading about Israeli airstrikes on the border crossing, tons of aid, truckloads of aid sitting on the other side of the border that cannot get through because of Israel's relentless bombing. Genocide, yes, in the making. We are witnessing it. Medea, do you have a question before we go to our Capitol calling party?
Yeah, maybe we could start with Noura and then Hueda to say, where do you suggest that people go for their information?
I think the most broad a range of options possible, really. I think, to get information on the ground, from the ground on social media, Eye on Palestine has been an invaluable source. I think updates more broadly, Al Jazeera has been really helpful. There's IMEU, Institute for Middle East Understanding, that always provides really great analysis and voices and resources for journalists and others trying to find out more facts and context. But yeah, for return and more historical knowledge, I think that's really critical too. Ilam Pape has, a lot of really great history from an Israeli perspective, as well as I think, yeah, just there's, yeah, so those are some that for now, but yeah, Hueda, do you have any others?
No, I think you covered a lot of the important ones. On social media, Eye on Palestine has been outstanding. I don't understand how they even get all kind of these videos as they are happening, and some other people that you can follow on social media. Al Jazeera, definitely, if you're more like to watch the news, if you like to read Electronic Intifada, is probably a good source. And IMEU, I think, has a list of other sources, but watching the US kind of mainstream media right now will do you a great disservice, a huge disservice.
Thank you so much, Hueda, Noura Khoury. Wonderful to have you as guests tonight. And I just added in the chat, others to follow on Twitter include Omar Badar, a Middle East policy analyst, terrific, and Anthony Lowenstein, an Australian journalist, a Jewish man who is very critical of Israel and knowledgeable, author of the Palestine Lab, exporting Israel surveillance technology, etc. All right, with that, because there's so many on the call, I'm just going to ask you to please post in the chat your thank yous, your gratitude to our guests. And we're going to move into our take action portion. And of course, we're not saying that this is the be all and end all to call your congressperson. It is one action we can take. Certainly, it's part of an overall approach that also includes being very visible, part of those protests around the country and in your local community.